Azalea Reed, 29, sat frozen at her childhood dining table as her father's words hung in the air like poison. "You have 2 days to get your stuff out." Her mother nodded in silent agreement, avoiding eye contact. 20 years of family secrets were about to unravel because of one discovered document, and Azalea wasn't leaving without making sure everyone at this table would regret choosing money over blood. Hey everyone. Before I continue with what happened after my parents tried to kick me out of our family, I'd love to know where you're watching from. The support from this community has been incredible through this whole family revenge journey. If you're new here, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Trust me, you'll want to see how I turned the tables when my own flesh and blood betrayed me. Now, let's get into how a simple family dinner turned into the beginning of the end for the perfect Reed family facade. For as long as I could remember, the Reed family had been the envy of our upscale Connecticut neighborhood. My father, Richard Reed, built his legal empire from nothing, becoming one of the most sought-after corporate attorneys on the East Coast. My mother, Eleanor, was the quintessential lawyer's wife, impeccably dressed, socially connected, and the backbone of every charity gala worth attending. And then there was me, their only child, Azalea, named after my grandmother's favorite flower. Growing up, our home was a showcase of success. Crystal chandeliers, marble countertops, and family portraits that depicted perfect smiles against perfectly staged backgrounds. But, like those portraits, our family happiness was carefully composed, hiding the hollow spaces between us. "Azalea, sit up straight," my mother would whisper harshly at dinner parties. "Remember, appearances matter more than anything." This was the mantra I grew up with. Appearances mattered more than feelings, more than truth, more than authentic connections. I became an extension of my parents' carefully crafted image, the gifted daughter who excelled at everything from piano recitals to academic decathlons. My achievements weren't celebrated, they were expected. After graduating with honors from Dartmouth, I followed in my father's footsteps and entered law school at Yale. This wasn't so much a choice as it was the next logical step in the life that had been mapped out for me since birth. But halfway through my second year, I realized I was living someone else's dream. The law didn't ignite any passion in me. It felt suffocating, like the tight smiles my mother wore at social functions. "Dad, I don't think law is for me," I confessed, one evening during a rare moment alone with my father in his study. He barely looked up from his documents. "Don't be ridiculous, Azalea. Reeds are lawyers. It's in your blood. But I'm thinking about switching to environmental science. I could make a real difference." That was when I saw a side of my father I'd never witnessed before. His face flushed crimson as he slammed his palm against his mahogany desk. "I didn't invest 25 years in your education for you to throw it away on some tree-hugging fantasy. You will finish law school, you will join my firm, and you will continue the legacy I've built. This discussion is over." But something had shifted inside me that day. For the first time, I saw the conditional nature of my parents' love. It existed only as long as I remained the perfect reflection of their ambitions. Still, I lacked the courage to break away completely. I finished law school, passed the bar, and joined my father's firm as expected. For 3 years, I played the part of the dutiful daughter and rising legal star, all while feeling increasingly empty inside. The only bright spot in my life was Marcus, a forensic accountant I met while working on a complex corporate fraud case. Unlike the ambitious lawyers my parents had paraded before me as potential suitors, Marcus was kind, unpretentious, and genuinely interested in who I was beneath the polished exterior. He saw through the facade I'd perfected over the years and encouraged me to pursue my true interests. "You light up when you talk about conservation work, Azalea," he told me one night as we walked along the waterfront. "I've never seen you look that way when discussing a legal case." With Marcus's support, I began volunteering weekends at a local wildlife rehabilitation center. Those Saturday mornings covered in dirt and helping injured animals were the only times I felt truly alive. Of course, I kept this hidden from my parents, who would have seen it as beneath our family's status. As my relationship with Marcus deepened, my parents grew increasingly disapproving. He wasn't from the right background, didn't belong to the right clubs, and worst of all, he encouraged me to question the path they had chosen for me. "He's using you to advance his career," my mother insisted during one of our tense Sunday dinners. "Men like that, from his sort of background, they always have angles." What she meant was that Marcus came from a middle-class family in Ohio, had attended state schools on scholarships, and had built his career through hard work rather than connections. In their eyes, these were unforgivable shortcomings. The mounting tension came to a head when Marcus proposed. The 2-carat diamond wasn't as large as what my mother would have deemed appropriate, but the love behind it was real, something I'd never witnessed between my parents. When I called to share the news, my mother's response was chilling. "If you marry him, don't expect us to attend the wedding. You're making a mistake that will haunt you for the rest of your life." For the first time, I stood my ground. "Then I guess you'll be missed at the ceremony." The months that followed were a cold war of sorts. I continued working at my father's firm, but our interactions were strictly professional. Sunday dinners became a thing of the past, and my mother's calls dwindled to perfunctory check-ins about appearances at important social events. 2 weeks before my wedding, I discovered the first crack in my family's perfect facade. While searching for an old tax document in my father's home office, a space I'd been granted limited access to throughout my life, I accidentally knocked over a stack of files. As I scrambled to reorganize them, a yellowed envelope caught my eye. It was addressed to my mother, dated 30 years ago, with a return address I didn't recognize. Curiosity got the better of me, and I carefully opened it. Inside was a letter that would change everything I thought I knew about my perfect family. The yellowed letter trembled in my hands, its faded ink telling a story so different from the one I'd been raised to believe that my mind struggled to process the words before me. It was from a woman named Claudia Moretti, dated just months before my birth, and addressed to my mother in handwriting that was both elegant and desperate. "Eleanor," it began, "I understand your decision to raise Richard's child as your own, but please reconsider allowing me some part in my daughter's life. She may have been unplanned, but she is not unwanted. I'm not asking to disrupt your marriage or the life you've built only for the chance to know the child I carried for 9 months." The letter continued, detailing arrangements that had been proposed and rejected pleas that had gone unanswered, and finally, a resignation to the terms my mother had apparently set: complete and permanent separation in exchange for financial support. I sank to the floor of my father's office, the carefully constructed narrative of my life crumbling around me. I wasn't Eleanor Reed's daughter. I was the product of my father's affair with an Italian woman named Claudia, a truth that had been hidden from me for 29 years. With shaking hands, I searched through the rest of the fallen files and discovered more letters from Claudia spanning several years, all unopened, their seals intact. My mother had kept them perhaps as insurance, but had never read their contents. I did. Each one documented birthdays, holidays, and milestones Claudia had missed, often accompanied by small gifts and photographs of herself that had never reached me. The most recent letter was dated just 5 years ago. In it, Claudia mentioned battling cancer and made one final plea to meet me before it might be too late. My heart shattered as I realized this woman, my biological mother, might already be gone, taking with her any chance I had of knowing my true origins. Tucked within the stack of letters was a legal document, a contract of sorts between my father, my mother, and Claudia. It outlined the terms of what could only be described as my purchase: a substantial sum paid to Claudia for her to disappear, relinquish all parental rights, and never contact me. My mother, unable to have children of her own, had agreed to raise me as hers, and my father had orchestrated the entire arrangement like one of his corporate acquisitions. I was property, not a daughter. An investment in their perfect family image. The magnitude of the deception was staggering. Every childhood memory now required re-examination. My mother's emotional distance suddenly made painful sense. I wasn't the daughter she'd dreamed of. I was a living reminder of my father's infidelity, a compromise she'd made to preserve her marriage and social standing. For hours I sat amid the scattered evidence of my fraudulent life, trying to process my new reality. By the time I heard my parents' car in the driveway returning from their charity gala, I had made copies of every document and returned the originals to their hiding place. I needed time to think, to plan my next move carefully. Over the following days, I conducted my own investigation. Using the resources at my disposal through the law firm, I managed to locate Claudia Moretti in Milan. To my immense relief, she was still alive, having survived her battle with cancer. Through a series of carefully worded emails, I established contact without revealing my identity, probing gently to confirm the details I'd discovered. Meanwhile, I continued the charade of being the perfect daughter and lawyer, all while the truth burned inside me like acid. My parents noticed nothing amiss. They had never truly seen me anyway. The final piece fell into place when I discovered financial records indicating that my father had been embezzling from the firm's client accounts for years, using elaborate schemes to cover his tracks. The lifestyle that my mother so cherished, the mansion, the vacations, the social status, was built on fraud. My father, the respected attorney who had lectured me about integrity and family legacy, was a criminal. I now had all the ammunition I needed, but I hesitated. These people had raised me, however, coldly. Despite everything, some small part of me hoped for an explanation, an apology, some acknowledgement of their wrongdoing that might preserve a fragment of our relationship. It was this lingering hope that led me to accept their invitation to dinner 1 week before my wedding to Marcus. Perhaps I thought I could confront them privately, give them a chance to come clean and make amends. I arrived at my childhood home that evening with my heart pounding but my resolve firm. The table was set with the formal china and crystal, an unusual choice for what was supposed to be a casual family dinner. Azalea, darling, my mother, greeted me with her practiced social smile, air-kissing both cheeks. "You look tired." Wedding planning taking its toll. "I'm fine, Mother," I replied, noting how strange it felt to call her that now, knowing what I knew. Just busy with the final arrangements. My father emerged from his study, drink in hand, his face already flushed from what was clearly not his first scotch of the evening. "There she is," he said, with unusual warmth. "Our brilliant daughter." The performance continued through appetizers, pleasant small talk about neutral topics, avoiding any mention of Marcus or the wedding. It wasn't until my mother brought out the main course that the atmosphere shifted. "Your father and I have been thinking," she began, her voice taking on the same tone she used when firing household staff, "about your future." Oh, I kept my expression neutral, though my stomach clenched in anticipation. "This wedding," my father interjected, setting down his fork with a sharp clink against fine china. "It's a mistake. We've indulged this relationship with Marcus long enough," my mother continued. "It's time you considered what's truly best for your future, for the family name." I stared at them, wondering if they would ever see me as anything more than an extension of themselves. "And what exactly do you think is best for me?" My father slid a folder across the table. "Stanley Whitman's son is returning from London next month. His family's connections would be invaluable to the firm's expansion. He's expressed interest in meeting you." I didn't touch the folder. "I'm engaged to be married in 1 week. An engagement that can be broken," my mother said dismissively. "We'll handle any embarrassment. Better a canceled wedding than a divorce in 5 years when you realize what you've thrown away." The audacity of it all, their assumption that they could still dictate my life even as they sat on a foundation of lies, ignited something in me. But I maintained my composure, 29 years of training, not easily discarded. I see, I said quietly. And if I go through with marrying Marcus, my father's expression hardened, the mask of paternal concern dropping away, then you're no longer welcome in this family. You'll be cut off completely, financially, professionally, personally. No job at the firm, no inheritance, no support of any kind. You have 2 days to get your stuff out of the guest house, my mother added, her voice cold. And to come to your senses. Their ultimatum hung in the air between us, the final confirmation that their love had always been conditional, that I had only ever been valuable to them as a pawn in their social chess game. What they didn't realize was that they had just freed me from any lingering obligation I felt toward them. I understand perfectly, I said, rising from my seat, with a calm that surprised even me. Thank you for making this decision so much easier. As I walked out of that dining room, leaving my barely touched dinner behind, I knew exactly what I had to do. The Reed family was about to learn that their perfect daughter had inherited more than just her father's legal mind. She'd also learned how to play the long game. The moment I stepped outside my parents' house, the cool evening air hit my face, and for the first time in years I felt like I could truly breathe. My hands shook as I fumbled with my car keys, but my mind was crystal clear. The charade was over. 29 years of performing the role of the perfect daughter had ended with 7 simple words. You have 2 days to get out. I didn't drive home immediately. Instead, I found myself parking at the small local beach, where I'd spent countless childhood afternoons alone, skipping rocks and dreaming of a life where I belonged. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had always felt like an outsider in my family, never understanding why. Now I knew. Under the pale moonlight, I called Marcus. They've given me an ultimatum, I said when he answered, my voice steadier than I expected. Either I break our engagement and agree to meet some wealthy lawyer's son, or I'm cut off completely. Marcus's response was immediate and unwavering. Then we'll build our own family, one that's based on love instead of conditions and appearances. His words wrapped around me like a warm embrace, and for a moment I considered walking away from it all, taking only what I could fit in my car, and starting fresh with the man who loved me for who I was, not for what I represented. But then I thought of Claudia, my birth mother, who had been denied any relationship with her only child because of my parents' manipulation and greed. I thought of the clients my father had stolen from the lives that had potentially been ruined by his fraud. Walking away wasn't enough. The truth needed to come to light. The next morning, instead of clearing out my belongings from the guest house as ordered, I went to work at my father's firm as usual. No one there knew about the ultimatum or the impending rupture in the Reed family. To them, I was still Richard Reed's brilliant protege, the heir apparent to his legal kingdom. I used my access to delve deeper into my father's financial improprieties. What I found exceeded even my worst suspicions. For over 15 years, Richard had been systematically skimming from client trust accounts, manipulating records, and using his reputation to cover his tracks. The amounts were staggering millions, siphoned away to offshore accounts, real estate holdings under shell companies, and investments that weren't in any of the firm's official portfolios. During my lunch break, I made a call to Claudia in Milan. After weeks of cautious emails, I was finally ready to reveal my identity. Pronto. Her voice was melodic with just a hint of an Italian accent. Claudia, I said, my heart racing. This is Azalea. Azalea Reed. I believe I'm your daughter. The silence that followed felt eternal. When she finally spoke, her voice was choked with emotion. Azalea, my Azalea. How did you find me? It's a long story, I replied, tears streaming down my face. But I know everything now about the agreement, about how they kept us apart. And I want you to know that I'm going to make it right. We talked for nearly an hour, years of separation condensed into precious minutes. She told me about her life in Milan as an art restorer, how she had never married or had other children, how she had kept a picture of me as a newborn all these years. I learned that she had tried many times to see me, only to be threatened with legal action by my father. They told me it would be better for you, she explained, that you would have opportunities with them that I could never provide. And the money. At the time, I was very young and very poor. I thought perhaps they were right. They weren't, I assured her. Nothing could have been worth growing up without knowing you. By the end of our conversation, we had made plans for her to fly to Connecticut. I wanted her there for my wedding. Wanted to begin our relationship in person, surrounded by real love, not the counterfeit version I'd been raised with. After speaking with Claudia, I visited the office of Bernard Kosterman, a senior partner at a rival firm known for his uncompromising ethics and his particular disdain for my father. I had prepared a detailed file documenting Richard's embezzlement, complete with account numbers, transaction records, and a timeline of his activities. "Why are you bringing this to me?" Bernard asked, after reviewing the evidence, his bushy eyebrows raised in surprise. "He's your father." "Because it needs to stop," I replied simply, "and because I need someone who won't be swayed by the Reed name or intimidated by my father's connections." Bernard agreed to take the case, but advised me to proceed with caution. Richard won't go down without a fight. He'll use everything and everyone at his disposal to discredit you. I nodded, fully aware of what I was setting in motion. I'm counting on it. That evening, I returned to the guest house on my parents' property to collect my things. I had expected to find my mother waiting to persuade me one last time, or to deliver more ultimatums, but the main house was dark and silent. They were avoiding me, probably believing I would slink away in defeat. As I packed my belongings, I came across photographs from my childhood, carefully staged family portraits, where we all smiled perfectly while standing at precisely measured distances from one another. I left these behind, taking only a few personal items that held genuine meaning. The last thing I did before leaving was place a sealed envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside was a copy of all the evidence I had gathered about my father's financial crimes, along with a note that read simply, "I know everything. I've always been more than just your investment." I knew it wouldn't be long before my father discovered what I had done. The carefully constructed walls of the Reed family were about to come crashing down, and I needed to be prepared for the fallout. Marcus was waiting for me at our apartment, having already cleared space for my belongings. As I unpacked the remnants of my old life, I filled him in on everything that had transpired. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, concern etched across his face. "Once you start this, there's no going back." I paused, holding a small box containing the few childhood mementos I'd chosen to keep. "I've spent my entire life trying to earn the love of people who saw me as property, as an extension of their ambitions. I've been living a lie without even knowing it. So yes, I'm sure. It's time for the truth, whatever the consequences." That night, wrapped in Marcus's arms, I slept more peacefully than I had in years, despite the storm I knew was brewing. For the first time, I wasn't trying to be the perfect daughter or the rising legal star or anything other than simply myself, Azalea, a woman finally taking control of her own story. The next morning, the first ripples of what would soon become a tsunami began to appear. My father called repeatedly, his messages growing increasingly frantic and then threatening. By afternoon, he had sent a senior associate from the firm to discuss my future, a thinly veiled attempt to assess how much I knew and what I planned to do with that knowledge. I refused to meet with the associate, instead sending a clear message back: "Tell Richard that Claudia sends her regards and looks forward to seeing him again." It was a calculated risk, using Claudia's name so openly. I knew it would provoke my father, possibly pushing him to make mistakes. What I hadn't anticipated was how quickly things would escalate, or how far my parents would go to preserve their precious facade. That evening, as Marcus and I were reviewing final details for our wedding, we received word that my father had suffered what appeared to be a heart attack. He had been rushed to the hospital after collapsing at the firm. "We should go," Marcus said, already reaching for his car keys. I hesitated, torn between human compassion and the knowledge that this could very well be another manipulation tactic. "Let me call the hospital first." Sure enough, when I contacted the cardiac unit, they had no record of a Richard Reed being admitted. A quick call to my father's assistant confirmed my suspicions. He was perfectly fine, working late at the office as usual. "It's starting," I told Marcus grimly. "The games, the manipulation. They'll try anything to regain control." What I didn't realize then was just how dark those games would become, or that the following days would test every ounce of resolve I possessed. The battle for truth was officially underway, and the Reeds were about to discover that the daughter they had raised to be perfect had learned their lessons all too well, including how to systematically dismantle an enemy. The morning of what should have been my final wedding dress fitting, I received a call from our venue. The manager's voice was apologetic but firm. Our reservation had been canceled, and our deposit would not be refunded due to contractual violations they refused to specify. Within the hour, similar calls came from our caterer, photographer, and florist, all suddenly unavailable, all citing vague contract issues. Your father, Marcus said, not needing to elaborate. I nodded, a strange calm settling over me. "He's trying to force us to postpone the wedding. He thinks if he can create enough chaos, I'll come crawling back, begging for his help." What my father didn't understand was that the opulent wedding had never been my dream. It had been his and my mother's vision of what was appropriate for a Reed. Marcus and I had gone along with their plans, mainly to keep the peace. Now freed from those constraints, we made a decision that would be the first of many surprises for my parents. "Let's get married anyway," I suggested to Marcus. Not the spectacle they planned, but something real. Something ours. Within 24 hours, we had reorganized our entire wedding. A small ceremony at a local botanical garden with only our closest friends and a few of Marcus's family members. I called Claudia, who had already booked her flight from Milan, and assured her that she would still witness her daughter's marriage, albeit under different circumstances than initially planned. Meanwhile, the legal machinery I had set in motion was grinding forward. Bernard Kosterman had presented my evidence to the State Bar Association and the District Attorney's Office. While they investigated news of potential improprieties, at Reed and Associates began to circulate within legal circles. My father's response was swift and brutal. By the end of the week, I had been served with a lawsuit claiming I had stolen confidential documents from the firm, violated attorney-client privilege, and defamed his character with malicious falsehoods. The complaint sought millions in damages and an immediate injunction preventing me from disclosing any further information. "He's trying to gag you with legal threats," Bernard observed when I brought him the paperwork. Classic Richard Reed, when cornered, attack viciously. "Will it work?" I asked. Bernard shook his head. "Not this time. The evidence of his embezzlement is too substantial, and as his employee, you were well within your rights to report suspected illegal activity. But be prepared, this is just his opening move." Bernard was right. The next day, I discovered my professional reputation under assault. Rumors began circulating that I had fabricated evidence against my father after being passed over for promotion, that I had mental health issues, that I was vindictive and unstable. Former colleagues suddenly wouldn't return my calls and job interviews I had scheduled, as contingencies were abruptly canceled. Most painfully, my mother orchestrated a social offensive. Women who had been my friends since childhood, daughters of her social circle, began distancing themselves. Invitations were rescinded, group text chains fell silent, and I found myself effectively excommunicated from the world I had grown up in. "They're trying to isolate you," Marcus observed as I stared at my suddenly quiet phone. "Make you feel like you have no one but them." "I know," I replied. "But they've never understood that their world isn't the only one that matters." To counter their narrative, I had been meticulously documenting everything. Every canceled contract, every rumor traced back to its source, every sudden social rejection. These weren't just petty grievances. They were evidence of a coordinated campaign of retaliation and witness intimidation. 3 days before our rescheduled wedding, Claudia arrived from Milan. Meeting her in person for the first time at the airport was surreal, like looking at an older version of myself. We shared the same eyes, the same hands, even the same tendency to tuck hair behind our left ear when nervous. As we embraced, years of longing collapsed into a single moment of connection. "You are so brave," she whispered, holding my face in her hands. "So much braver than I was at your age." Having Claudia with us changed everything. She brought with her additional documentation letters my father had sent threatening her over the years. The original contract she had been pressured to sign, even recordings of phone calls where my mother had coldly rejected her pleas to have even minimal contact with me. I kept everything she explained as we reviewed the materials in my apartment. At first, because I was afraid of your father, and later because I hoped someday you would find me and you would need to understand what happened. The day before our wedding, my father made his most desperate move yet. He and my mother appeared unannounced at our apartment, something they had never done before. My mother was dressed impeccably, as always, but her eyes were red-rimmed from either tears or lack of sleep. My father looked diminished somehow, his usual commanding presence undercut by nervous energy. Azalea, my mother, began, her voice artificially warm. "We need to talk as a family. May we come in?" I stood in the doorway, blocking their entry. "We have nothing to discuss unless you're ready to admit the truth. All of it." My father's façade cracked slightly. "This vendetta of yours has gone far enough. You've made your point. Now it's time to end this nonsense before irreparable damage is done to this family." "Irreparable damage was done 30 years ago," I replied evenly, "when you decided to buy a child and lie to her for her entire life." My mother flinched as if I'd slapped her. "That's not how it was. We gave you everything, the best schools, opportunities, a place in society, everything except honesty. Everything except unconditional love." I took a deep breath. "And now you're here not because you care about me, but because you're scared of what will happen when the truth comes out." My father's expression hardened. "You have no idea what you're doing. This crusade of yours won't just hurt us, it will destroy your own future. No law firm will touch you after this. You'll be blackballed from every worthwhile social circle. Is that what you want? To throw away everything we've built for you?" "No," Richard, came a voice from behind me. "She is not throwing away anything. You are the one who has thrown away the chance to know your remarkable daughter." Claudia stepped forward, standing beside me in the doorway. The color drained from my parents' faces as they stared at the woman they had paid to disappear 3 decades ago. "You," my mother whispered, her perfect composure finally shattering. "You have no right to be here." "She has every right," I countered. "More right than you, Eleanor." My father recovered quickly, his lawyer's instincts taking over. "Whatever she's told you is hearsay and inadmissible. Whatever documents she's shown you were signed under duress and are unenforceable. If you think..." "Stop," I interrupted. "Just stop. This isn't a courtroom, and I'm not a hostile witness. I'm the daughter you claim to love, standing here with my actual mother asking you one last time to tell the truth." A tense silence followed, broken only when Marcus joined us, placing a supportive hand on my shoulder. "You should leave," he told my parents quietly. "We're getting married tomorrow, with or without your blessing." After that, what happens next is entirely up to you. If you walk down that aisle, my father said, his voice low and dangerous, don't expect to ever set foot in our home again. I met his gaze steadily. I already took everything I need. As they turned to leave, my mother paused, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for me. Azalea, please. We can talk about this. We can find a way. It's too late for that, I said, stepping back from her touch. Far too late. We watched them walk to their car, my father's arm around my mother's shoulders, in a rare display of physical support. As they drove away, I felt a complex mix of emotions, grief for the family I had thought. I had relief that the confrontation was over, and a steely determination to see this through to the end. That night, as Marcus, Claudia, and I finalized the details for our small wedding, I received an email from Bernard. The district attorney had agreed to move forward with charges against my father. The investigation was now official, and there would be no stopping what was to come. Are you okay? Marcus asked, noticing my expression as I read the email. Yes, I said, surprised to realize it was true. For the first time in my life, I think I really am. Hey everyone, I know I've left you hanging at a pivotal moment in my family revenge story. The confrontation with my parents and meeting my birth mother changed everything. But what happened next at our wedding and afterward is where this journey gets even more intense. If you're feeling the emotional roller coaster right alongside me, hit that like button and subscribe to make sure you don't miss how this family drama unfolds. I'd love to know what you think my parents might try next. Trust me, they weren't done with their schemes. Leave your predictions in the comments below, and let's continue this incredible story together. Our wedding day dawned with perfect early summer weather, clear skies, and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of blooming flowers through the botanical garden. It was a far cry from the elaborate church ceremony and ballroom reception my parents had originally insisted upon. But as I stood with Claudia in a small garden cottage that served as our preparation area, I knew this intimate gathering was exactly what Marcus and I had always wanted. You look beautiful, Claudia said, helping me adjust the simple ivory sheath dress I had chosen for the occasion. It wasn't the designer gown my mother had selected with its excessive beading and dramatic train, but its elegant simplicity felt right. I can't believe you're really here, I told her, watching our reflections together in the mirror. All those years lost. Claudia squeezed my hand. We have now, and we have the future. That's what matters. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Security, says your parents just arrived with their lawyer. My stomach tightened. Despite their threats, some part of me had hoped they might come to support me, perhaps even with a change of heart. But bringing their attorney suggested they had something else entirely in mind. They're here, I told Claudia, and they've brought legal representation. She straightened her shoulders, her expression resolute. Then we faced them together. We had hired additional security for the wedding, anticipating some form of disruption. The guards had been instructed to keep my parents at a distance unless I specifically allowed their approach. As Claudia and I emerged from the cottage to make our way to the ceremony site, I spotted them standing near the garden entrance. My mother in a subdued navy dress that defied her usual colorful wedding attire, my father rigid in his best suit, and beside them Harrison Wells, the firm's litigation specialist. Our eyes met across the garden, and for a moment I considered walking over, giving them one final chance to be simply parents on their daughter's wedding day. But the presence of Harrison made their intentions clear. Don't engage unless necessary, whispered Marcus's best friend Alex, who had appeared at my side. A former military officer turned security consultant, he had volunteered to run interference with my parents. Everything is set up. Just focus on your day. I nodded gratefully, then took Claudia's arm as we continued toward the flower-draped pergola where Marcus and our 30 guests waited. The ceremony site had been arranged in a secluded corner of the gardens, surrounded by blooming azaleas, a coincidence that now felt like a meaningful connection to my birth mother's choice of name for me. As we approached, the small string quartet began playing and everyone rose. Marcus stood waiting, his face lighting up as he saw me. In that moment, my parents' presence faded from my awareness. This day wasn't about the past or about revenge. It was about beginning a new chapter with someone who loved me for who I truly was. The ceremony was brief, but deeply personal. We had written our own vows, promising honesty, support, and the freedom to be our authentic selves, values I had been denied growing up. When the officiant introduced Claudia as my mother who would present me, I heard a distinct murmur from the back where my parents stood watching. "I present my daughter Azalea with all the love I have carried for her in my heart for 29 years, Claudia said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. As we exchanged rings, I caught sight of my father whispering urgently to Harrison, who nodded and began typing on his phone. Whatever they were planning, I refused to let it intrude on this moment. After the final blessing, as Marcus and I turned to face our guests as a married couple, Harrison approached the pergola, a document in hand. "I apologize for the interruption," he announced loudly, "but I'm required to serve these papers immediately." Before he could reach us, Alex stepped smoothly into his path. "Any legal matters can wait until after the ceremony, counselor." "This is a temporary restraining order," Harrison insisted, attempting to move past Alex. "Miss Reed or Mrs. Calloway, now, I suppose, is legally prohibited from making any statements regarding Richard Reed or Reed and Associates, pending resolution of the defamation suit." Marcus stepped forward, positioning himself between the lawyer and me. "This is our wedding day. Serve your papers tomorrow." "The law doesn't recognize wedding day exemptions," Harrison replied coldly. What happened next unfolded so quickly that later guests would give conflicting accounts. My father, apparently impatient with Harrison's failure to deliver the papers, pushed forward. Alex moved to intercept him. There was a brief scuffle, and suddenly my father lost his balance, tumbling directly into the multi-tiered wedding cake that had been set up nearby. The crash silenced everyone. My father sat stunned, covered in buttercream and cake, his immaculate suit ruined, his dignity shattered. My mother rushed to help him up, her own designer outfit now smeared with frosting as well. I should have been horrified at the disruption, but instead, a strange, liberating laugh escaped me. The absurdity of it all, the mighty Richard Reed brought down by a wedding cake, struck me as perfect cosmic justice. Marcus joined in my laughter, then Claudia, and soon most of our guests were struggling to contain their amusement. I think I said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "That's what they call just desserts." My father's face flushed crimson with rage and humiliation as he struggled to his feet. For a man who had built his life around maintaining perfect appearances, this public embarrassment was perhaps the worst punishment imaginable. "This isn't over, Azalea," he snarled, cake still clinging to his expensive suit. "Not by a long shot." Actually, Richard came Bernard Kosterman's voice as he stepped forward from among our guests. "It is over. I've just received word that the district attorney has issued a warrant for your arrest. Securities, fraud, embezzlement, witness intimidation. The officers are waiting outside to avoid disrupting the wedding further, but they're quite insistent on speaking with you immediately." My father's expression shifted from rage to disbelief, then to a calculating calm that I recognized all too well. "This is absurd. A simple misunderstanding that my accountants will clear up immediately." "The evidence suggests otherwise," Bernard replied evenly, "including the documents you tried to destroy last night. Digital forensics are remarkable these days." My mother swayed slightly, reaching for support. "Richard, what is he talking about?" For perhaps the first time in their marriage, my father had no smooth explanation to offer her. As the security team escorted my parents and Harrison from the garden, I felt a confusing mix of emotions, satisfaction that justice was being served, but also a hollow sadness for what could have been if they had simply loved me for who I was rather than what I represented. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked, his arms steady around my waist. "I'm better than okay," I assured him, looking around at the people who truly cared about us. This is exactly how it needed to happen. We proceeded with our reception, the missing cake becoming a symbol of the obstacles we had overcome. As I danced with Marcus under twinkling garden lights, with Claudia watching proudly from nearby, I knew that the family I was building now was stronger and more authentic than the one I had left behind. The news of Richard Reed's arrest made the front page of the local papers the next day, just as Marcus and I were leaving for our honeymoon. The story would continue to unfold over the coming months, revealing the full extent of his financial crimes and the elaborate facade my parents had maintained for decades. 6 months after our wedding, I sat in the back row of the courtroom watching as my father stood to receive his sentence. The trial had been the talk of Connecticut's legal community. The respected Richard Reed facing multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and evidence tampering. Today would bring the final chapter of his professional life to a close. "The defendant will rise," the judge instructed, her expression stern as she prepared to deliver the sentence. My father stood slowly, his designer suit hanging slightly loose on his frame. The stress of the trial had aged him visibly, deep lines now etched around his eyes and mouth. For a moment, our gazes met across the courtroom, and I saw something I had never witnessed before. Vulnerability. "Richard Harold Reed, this court has found you guilty of 17 counts of securities fraud, 9 counts of embezzlement, and 3 counts of witness intimidation." The judge began, her voice echoing in the hushed courtroom. "Your actions have betrayed not only your client's trust, but the very foundations of our legal system. As an officer of the court, you were entrusted with upholding justice, not subverting it for personal gain." My father stood motionless, his attorney beside him, looking grim. "Taking into account your age and lack of prior criminal record, I hereby sentence you to 12 years in federal prison with the possibility of parole after serving 8 years. Additionally, you are ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $4.7 million to the clients you defrauded, and your license to practice law is permanently revoked." A collective murmur rippled through the courtroom. The sentence was substantial, not the maximum possible, but certainly no slap on the wrist. As the bailiff led my father away, he turned once more in my direction. I expected to see hatred or accusation in his expression, but instead, there was only a weary resignation. Outside, the courthouse reporters clustered around me, shouting questions about how it felt to testify against my own father, whether I regretted my actions, what this meant for my future. Marcus acted as a buffer, guiding me through the crowd toward our waiting car. "No comment at this time," he repeated firmly, shielding me from their probing lenses and microphones. Once safely inside the car, I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "It's really over." "One chapter is," Marcus agreed, taking my hand. "But we have many more to write." He was right, of course. The resolution of my father's case was just one piece of the complex puzzle my life had become. In the months since our wedding, so much had changed, some of it painful, some unexpectedly positive. My mother, facing her own legal troubles as an accessory to some of my father's financial crimes, had accepted a plea deal in exchange for her testimony. She would serve no prison time but was placed under house arrest for 2 years and ordered to perform extensive community service. The humiliation of her fall from social grace seemed to be punishment enough for Eleanor Reed, who had built her entire identity around her position in society. Surprisingly, as her carefully constructed world collapsed around her, my mother had reached out to me not with accusations or manipulation, but with something approaching genuine remorse. "I was wrong," she had said during one of our cautious meetings at her now quiet house. "About so many things, Azalea. I was wrong about what makes a family, about what matters in life. And I was wrong about you. Our relationship remained fragile, a delicate rebuilding that might never fully recover what had been lost. But there was at least honesty now where pretense had once ruled. Claudia had returned to Milan after an extended stay in Connecticut but visited regularly. We spoke almost daily, gradually filling in the missing pieces of each other's lives. She had brought photo albums of her family in Italy, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins I had never known existed. I was planning a trip to meet them all, to connect with a heritage that had been deliberately kept from me. Professionally, I had indeed been blackballed from most prestigious law firms, just as my father had predicted. His influence, even in disgrace, remained potent within certain circles. But this forced me to reconsider my path, to ask myself what I truly wanted, rather than what was expected of me. The answer had come unexpectedly. Using my legal training and newfound freedom, I had established a small nonprofit focused on family reconciliation and advocacy for parental rights in complex custody situations. The work was challenging but deeply fulfilling, allowing me to transform my personal trauma into something that could help others navigate similar circumstances. Marcus and I had moved into a modest house near the coast, far from the affluent neighborhood where I'd grown up. Our home was filled with light and laughter, a stark contrast to the cold perfection of my childhood residence. We were discussing starting a family of our own, though the idea still frightened me sometimes. The responsibility of breaking cycles, of loving a child without conditions. "You're not them," Marcus would reassure me during my moments of doubt. "You know exactly what a child needs, because you know what you were denied." As we pulled away from the courthouse, leaving behind the media frenzy and the finality of my father's sentencing, I realized how profoundly my definition of family had changed. It was no longer about shared names or bloodlines or maintaining appearances. It was about chosen connections, honest communication, and the courage to acknowledge mistakes. My phone chimed with a message from Bernard Kosterman, justice served. "Your grandfather would be proud." This was another unexpected development that had emerged during the investigation. The discovery that my paternal grandfather, whom I had been told died before I was born, was actually alive and well in a retirement community in Florida. My father had severed contact with him decades ago after a falling out over the family's legal practice and its ethical direction. Meeting Walter Reed now in his 90s, but still sharp-minded and forthright, had been like finding a missing puzzle piece. He had the same analytical mind as my father, but tempered with a moral compass that had never wavered. When I told him what his son had done, both professionally and personally, he had nodded sadly. Richard always believed that rules were for other people, Walter had told me. I tried to teach him that integrity matters more than success, but he chose his own path. You, Azalea, seemed to have found a better way. That evening, after the courthouse drama, Marcus and I hosted a small gathering at our home Claudia via video call from Milan Walter's caregiver, helping him join from Florida a few close friends who had stood by us throughout the ordeal. And somewhat tentatively my mother, who sat quietly at the edge of our living room. As we shared a meal together, I looked around at this unusual assembly, this imperfect, authentic family we were creating from the wreckage of lies and pretense. "I'd like to propose a toast," I said, raising my glass, "to truth, however difficult, to justice, however delayed, and to family not as we inherit it, but as we choose to rebuild it." As glasses clinked around our table, I caught my mother's eye. For a moment, the careful mask she had worn throughout my childhood slipped completely, revealing a woman I had never truly known, vulnerable, regretful, but perhaps finally real. "To second chances," she added softly, her voice catching. I nodded, acknowledging both the pain of our past and the possibility, however faint, of a different future. To second chances. Later, as our guests departed and Marcus and I cleared away dishes, He wrapped his arms around me from behind. You know what I realized today, watching you in that courtroom, seeing how you've handled everything? What's that? I asked, leaning back against his solid presence. That sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying someone else's world. It's about building your own on your terms with your values. I turned to face him, struck by the simple truth of his observation. What had begun as a quest for justice and retribution had evolved into something far more powerful. Reclaiming my own narrative, establishing boundaries, and creating connections based on authenticity rather than obligation. That's exactly what we're doing, I agreed, thinking of the life we were constructing together, brick by careful brick. And it's just beginning. As we stood in our kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of a gathering that would have been unimaginable a year earlier, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me my entire life. The path forward wouldn't be simple or straightforward. Family never is, especially one cobbled together from such complicated pieces. But for perhaps the first time, I was walking that path as my true self, no longer performing a role in someone else's production. The Reed family's perfect facade had shattered completely, revealing the rot beneath the polished surface. But from those fragments, something new and genuine was emerging. Messy, complicated, but infinitely more valuable than the illusion it replaced. 1 year to the day after my father's sentencing, I stood on the balcony of our coastal home, watching the sunrise paint the horizon in shades of pink and gold. So much had changed in 12 months that sometimes it felt like I was living someone else's life entirely in the best possible way. My nonprofit had grown beyond my initial expectations, now employing 4 full-time staff and providing support to dozens of families navigating complex custody and identity issues. Just last week, we had helped reunite a young woman with her birth father after 20 years of separation. Witnessing their tearful reunion had affirmed that all the struggles had been worth it. Claudia had relocated permanently to the United States, settling in a small apartment just 15 minutes from our house. Our relationship had deepened into something I had never experienced before. A mother-daughter bond built on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than expectation and performance. She had brought with her artistic talents that now brightened our community, teaching art restoration techniques at the local college and volunteering with children's art programs. My mother, having completed her house arrest, had surprised everyone by selling the mansion and most of its contents, keeping only a few meaningful personal items. She had moved into a modest condo, and in perhaps the most unexpected turn of events, had begun volunteer work at a women's shelter. Her organizational skills and fundraising connections proving valuable in ways she had never anticipated. Our relationship remained complicated, a delicate dance of tentative connection and protective boundaries. There were days when old patterns emerged, when her ingrained perfectionism or subtle manipulations threatened our fragile truce. But there were also moments of startling vulnerability, of genuine efforts to understand who I was rather than who she had tried to shape me into becoming. I keep a journal now, she had told me, during one of our monthly lunches. My therapist suggested it. Every time I start to judge or try to control a situation, I write it down instead of acting on it. The pages are filling up rather quickly. Her self-deprecating smile had been so unlike the carefully composed expressions of my childhood that I barely recognized her. As for my father, he remained in federal prison, his appeals exhausted. I had received exactly 1 letter from him, arriving 6 months into his sentence. Unlike the legal threats his attorneys had initially sent, this had been handwritten on plain prison stationery. His normally precise penmanship slightly shaky. "I won't ask for forgiveness," he had written. "Some things go beyond that. But I want you to know that in the quiet of this cell, with all the trappings of success stripped away, I've been forced to confront who I truly am. It isn't a pleasant reckoning. Perhaps that's the greatest gift you've given me, the gift of truth, however unwelcome. You were always stronger than I gave you credit for, Azalea. Stronger than me in the ways that actually matter. I hadn't responded, unsure what to say or whether any response was even necessary. The letter sat in my desk drawer, a reminder that even the most seemingly impenetrable facades eventually crack under the weight of their own deceptions. "Morning, beautiful," Marcus said, joining me on the balcony with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. Deep thoughts, I accepted the coffee gratefully, leaning into his solid warmth, just reflecting. It's been exactly a year since the sentencing. He nodded, understanding as always. A lot has changed. Everything has changed, I corrected gently. And it started with that family dinner, that ultimatum that was supposed to force me back in line. Little did they know, Marcus mused, they were actually setting you free. The irony wasn't lost on me. That dinner, the moment my parents had tried to exert their maximum control, had been the catalyst for my complete liberation from their expectations and manipulations. In trying to force me to conform to their vision, they had instead pushed me to create my own. Later that day, as we gathered around our dining table for a celebration of the nonprofit's first anniversary, I looked at the faces surrounding us. Claudia animated as she described her latest restoration project. Walter now living in a nearby assisted living facility where we visited regularly. My mother still somewhat reserved but making genuine efforts to engage. Marcus's parents, who had welcomed me into their family with an unconditional warmth I had never experienced, and friends who had stood by us through every challenge. This was my real family now, not defined by blood or obligation, but by choice and authentic connection. "Before we begin," I said, raising my glass, "I want to thank you all for being here, not just today, but throughout this journey. A year ago, I thought I was fighting to expose the truth about my family. What I didn't realize was that I was actually fighting to discover what family truly means." "To Azalea," Claudia said proudly, who had the courage to break free and the wisdom to build something better. As glasses clinked and conversation flowed around me, I felt a sense of completion, not an ending, but a circle, closing on one chapter while opening to endless new possibilities. The perfect Reed family had been an elaborate illusion, a house of cards that had inevitably collapsed. But from those ruins, something authentic had emerged, messy and imperfect, but real. That family dinner ultimatum, "You have 2 days to get your stuff out," had been intended as a punishment, a way to force my compliance through the threat of exclusion. Instead, it had become the first step on a path to genuine belonging, to a life built on truth rather than appearances. As I looked around at the people who now filled my life with meaning and authentic connection, I knew that sometimes what feels like the worst moment of your life can actually be the beginning of something beautiful if you have the courage to walk away from what is comfortable but false toward what is challenging but true. "So," Marcus whispered, squeezing my hand under the table, "was it worth it?" All of it. I thought of all we had lost and all we had gained, the painful truths and the liberating honesty, the family I had been born into and the one I had chosen to create. Every single moment I answered without hesitation. I wouldn't change a thing. Hey everyone, that brings us to the end of my family revenge story. Can you believe how everything turned out? I'd love to know if you've ever experienced family betrayal or had to rebuild relationships on your own terms. Drop a comment below with your thoughts or experiences. Your stories help others feel less alone. If this journey resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories about family dynamics, personal growth, and finding your authentic path. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that sometimes the family we choose is more powerful than the one we're born into. Thank you so much for listening to my story. And remember, sometimes when people try to shut you out, they're actually setting you free to build something better. Until next time.